Ladies and gentlemen, my friends, life is a journey full of challenges, and the deepest desire of our hearts is often to find peace, purpose, and guidance. We live in a world full of distractions, yet one of the most profound ways to find peace is through prayer. Prayer connects us with something greater, something eternal. But let us face a hard truth: there are forces, often unseen and unnoticed, that can silently undermine our prayers. These are the silent killers of prayer, and they threaten the power of communication between our hearts and the divine. I am here to remind you today that if you want someone in your life, truly want them to be a part of your existence, there are things to be aware of. You see, prayer is not just about asking for blessings, it's about building a relationship. Relationships with others and with God require more than just words. They demand sincerity, commitment, and, above all, faith. Let's discuss 6 crucial truths that should guide your heart and your actions when you desire someone in your life. Selfishness is one of the most dangerous and subtle threats to any relationship, including our relationship with God. It often starts small, like a seed planted deep within the heart, and gradually grows into something that can choke the life out of connection and intimacy. We live in a world that often prioritizes individual desires, where the value of self is magnified. This can make it incredibly difficult to recognize when we're being driven by selfishness, especially when it's rooted in the most innocent looking forms of personal ambition or desire. In the context of prayer, selfishness can manifest as a desire to focus solely on our own needs, wants, and desires, without giving consideration to the broader picture. Prayer, at its core, is meant to be an open channel of communication with God, a space where we can not only express our needs, but also align our hearts with God's purpose. When selfishness enters into this sacred space, we can lose sight of God's will and start to treat prayer like a shopping list, demanding things for ourselves without truly listening to what God might want to say to us. The danger of selfishness in prayer is that it limits us. It keeps us from growing spiritually because it causes us to focus exclusively on ourselves. Prayer is not just about asking for blessings, healing, or comfort for our personal situation. While it's entirely appropriate to bring our burdens before God, a selfish heart tends to ignore the needs of others, and even worse, the call to serve those around us. We may pray for prosperity or peace, but fail to pray for others who might be struggling, for those who are hurting, or for those who don't know the peace that we sometimes take for granted. Selfishness in prayer also tends to stunt the way we view God. When our focus is solely on our own desires, we begin to treat God as a tool to meet our personal goals rather than a loving Father with His own desires and plans for our lives. We fail to understand that God's purpose for us is far greater than the fulfillment of our personal wishes. The more selfish we become, the more we view God as a servant to our needs rather than recognizing that we are called to serve His will. We lose the true meaning of prayer, which is to align ourselves with God's will, to ask for guidance, and to find peace in the knowledge that God knows what's best for us, even when we don't fully understand. This same selfishness spills over into our relationships with others. When we approach relationships from a place of selfishness, we are essentially saying that the other person exists to serve our needs, whether those needs are emotional, physical, or spiritual. We expect to receive love, care, and attention, but we fail to give those things in return. We may seek someone in our life to fill a void, but when we're driven by selfishness, we fail to consider the needs, feelings, and desires of the other person. Relationships become transactional, not mutual, where the focus is always on what we can gain rather than what we can give. In the long run, selfishness erodes the foundation of any relationship, whether with God or with others. It breeds dissatisfaction because no matter how much we receive, it never seems enough. It keeps us focused on our own immediate desires rather than on the long-term growth and flourishing that true connection brings. In a healthy relationship, whether with God or with another person, the goal is to seek the welfare of the other, to love them unconditionally, and to create a bond based on shared experiences, mutual respect, and genuine care. When we approach life and prayer with a self-centered mindset, we miss the opportunity to experience the deep fulfillment that comes with selflessness. There is great joy in giving and serving, whether it's serving others through acts of kindness or submitting ourselves to God's greater purpose. Prayer, instead of becoming a way to merely seek out personal comfort or gain, becomes a powerful tool for transformation. Through selflessness, we begin to see that God is more interested in our hearts than in our material needs. We learn to trust Him with our lives, knowing that He is working all things for our good. In relationships, when we choose to approach others with selflessness, we find that the connection deepens. Instead of constantly asking, "What can I get from this person?" we start asking, "What can I offer?" This shift in mindset allows for a richer, more fulfilling bond. We begin to realize that relationships thrive when both individuals are willing to give without expecting anything in return. It's through these acts of selflessness that we experience true intimacy and love. Ultimately, selfishness is a silent killer. It creeps in unnoticed, eroding the beauty of genuine connection with God and others. But when we remove selfishness from our hearts and replace it with selflessness, we open ourselves up to deeper, more meaningful relationships that are based on mutual care, respect, and love. It's through this shift in perspective that we not only grow spiritually, but also experience the joy of true connection, where our needs are met not by demanding, but by giving. Pride is one of the most insidious forces that can quietly creep into our lives, often masquerading as confidence or self-assurance. It can go unnoticed for long periods, and when it does reveal itself, it can cause significant damage to our relationships, both with others and with God. Pride has a way of elevating the self above all else, distorting our perception of our own importance and leading us to believe that we don't need help, or worse, that we are above others. It's the silent killer of meaningful relationships because it's built on the foundation of self-sufficiency, which, in reality, can only isolate us. In the context of prayer, pride can be incredibly destructive. Prayer is meant to be an intimate act of humility, a recognition that we are dependent on God for strength, wisdom, and guidance. It is a moment where we acknowledge that we cannot do life alone, that we need the support of a loving Creator. But when pride enters, prayer becomes an afterthought, something we do when we're desperate or when we want something, rather than a continuous, humble conversation with God. When we are prideful, we often approach prayer with a sense of entitlement, demanding things from God as if He owes us something. Instead of praying with a heart of gratitude and submission, we approach Him with the mindset that we are deserving of blessings or favor simply because of who we are or what we have done. Pride distorts our understanding of God's grace, making us think that we've earned the right to be heard or that we somehow control the terms of our relationship with Him. This silent killer in prayer goes even further by convincing us that we can handle life on our own. The prideful heart refuses to acknowledge its own weaknesses, believing that there is no need to rely on anyone, even God. Prayer becomes irrelevant in this mindset because we no longer see the need to ask for guidance or strength. We believe that we can navigate the complexities of life by our own wisdom and strength, leaving no room for God's voice to be heard. This, however, leaves us spiritually disconnected and vulnerable as we fail to rely on the very source of life and purpose. Pride also has a detrimental effect on our relationships with others. It convinces us that we are superior, leading to an attitude of condescension or judgment toward those around us. Whether in our families, friendships, or romantic relationships, pride causes us to elevate ourselves and look down on others, and it prevents us from truly seeing them as they are. Instead of offering love, understanding, and support, we offer criticism, judgment, or worse, indifference. In the end, pride drives a wedge between us and others, making it impossible to build genuine, loving connections. When pride governs our relationships, we also become less willing to listen, apologize, or learn from others. We can become so fixated on being right, on holding on to our status or image, that we stop valuing the opinions and perspectives of those around us. We fail to see them as equals and instead view them as people to either impress or control. The inability to be humble and admit our mistakes destroys trust and intimacy in relationships, whether with friends, family, or a romantic partner. A proud heart is often a closed one, unwilling to learn and unwilling to grow. Furthermore, pride robs us of one of the most important aspects of a healthy relationship: vulnerability. To truly connect with others, we must be able to open up, show our weaknesses, and admit our need for support. But pride keeps us locked in our own armor, hiding behind a false image of perfection or strength. We fear being seen as less than, so we refuse to expose our true selves. This is not only isolating, but also keeps relationships from reaching their fullest potential. No one can truly know us if we are constantly hiding behind prideful facades, and no relationship can ever thrive without genuine openness and vulnerability. In the same way, pride damages our relationship with God by making us resistant to His correction, guidance, and love. God desires to teach us, shape us, and mold us into His image, but pride often makes us unwilling to submit to His will. Instead of approaching Him in humility, seeking His wisdom, and listening to His voice, we resist His correction, thinking that we know better. This attitude of pride not only keeps us spiritually stagnant, but also hinders the transformational work that God wants to do in our hearts. Ultimately, pride keeps us from experiencing the depth of love, connection, and transformation that is available to us both from God and others. It is a silent killer because it doesn't always appear in obvious ways. It doesn't announce itself loudly. Instead, it seeps into our hearts subtly, whispering lies of self, sufficiency, and superiority. It convinces us that we don't need God or others, that we are fine on our own, when in reality, we are depriving ourselves of the very things that lead to true fulfillment and joy. The antidote to pride is humility. Humility allows us to see ourselves for who we truly are, dependent on God, in need of His grace, and capable of deep love and connection with others. In humility, we acknowledge that we don't have all the answers and that we are willing to listen, learn, and grow. This humility opens the door to a richer, more authentic relationship with God and with the people in our lives. The moment we let go of pride and embrace humility, we create space for love, growth, and true transformation to take place in our hearts and our relationships. Unforgiveness is a weight that can silently consume a person, rotting the heart from the inside out. It begins as a small wound, a hurt that may seem justified, but over time it festers and grows. What starts as a simple feeling of betrayal, disappointment, or anger can evolve into a poison that seeps into every area of a person's life. The consequences of unforgiveness stretch far beyond the initial hurt and can destroy relationships, damage mental and emotional well-being, and even prevent us from experiencing the fullness of God's grace and love. It's easy to think that holding on to unforgiveness gives us control over the situation, or that we're somehow protecting ourselves. But in truth, it is a chain that binds us, preventing us from experiencing freedom and healing. The act of refusing to forgive is a conscious decision to keep our hearts closed off from the person who has wronged us. When we refuse to forgive, we hold onto the hurt and the anger, and we let those negative emotions define how we see the world and how we relate to others. The more we dwell on the wrong done to us, the more it becomes a part of our identity. Instead of letting go of the offense, we nurture it, feeding it with resentment and bitterness. Over time, this unforgiveness becomes a consuming force that affects how we think, how we behave, and how we relate to the people around us. One of the most damaging effects of unforgiveness is how it distorts our view of others. When we hold on to hurt, we often begin to see the person who wronged us not as a flawed human being, but as an enemy. We turn them into a symbol of everything that is wrong in the world. We may even start to paint everyone with the same brush, believing that others will hurt us in the same way. Our view of relationships becomes tainted because we project our anger and hurt onto others, creating a barrier to true connection. This distortion can prevent us from experiencing the joy and fulfillment of healthy relationships, as we are unable to trust others or let our guard down. Unforgiveness also creates a barrier between us and God. Jesus spoke clearly about the importance of forgiveness, teaching that if we do not forgive others, we cannot expect to be forgiven ourselves. This is not merely a command. It is a principle that speaks to the very nature of the relationship we have with our Creator. When we hold on to unforgiveness, we are refusing to let go of the debt owed to us, even though we have been forgiven an infinitely greater debt by God. It is a refusal to accept the grace and mercy that God offers freely to us, and instead we choose to remain in a state of spiritual bondage. Our relationship with God is hindered because unforgiveness keeps us from fully experiencing His love and forgiveness. We cannot walk in the fullness of God's peace when our hearts are hardened by unresolved hurt. Emotionally, unforgiveness eats away at our peace. The act of holding on to bitterness requires constant attention. We replay the offense over and over again in our minds, stewing in our anger and frustration. The more we hold on to the pain, the more it takes root in our hearts. Unforgiveness becomes an emotional cycle where the pain of the past continually haunts us, preventing us from moving forward. This creates a toxic emotional environment where bitterness, anger, and resentment begin to define our outlook on life. It robs us of joy, leaving us stuck in the past, unable to live fully in the present or embrace the future. In addition to the emotional and spiritual costs, unforgiveness has physical repercussions as well. Studies have shown that holding on to anger and bitterness can contribute to a variety of health problems, including high blood pressure, stress, anxiety, and even weakened immune function. The mental burden of unforgiveness manifests in our physical bodies as the stress and tension accumulate. The more we hold onto grudges, the more it wears us down, both emotionally and physically. The body cannot continue to carry the weight of unforgiveness without eventually showing signs of wear. Moreover, unforgiveness can have long, lasting effects on our ability to build trust and intimacy in future relationships. When we hold on to past hurts, we are less likely to open up to others, fearing that they will hurt us in the same way. We build walls around our hearts, thinking that they will protect us, but in reality, these walls isolate us from love and connection. By refusing to forgive, we remain stuck in a cycle of distrust, perpetuating the very thing that we fear. We become prisoners of our own resentment, unwilling to let go of the past to experience the fullness of the future. Unforgiveness also prevents healing. The act of forgiving is not about excusing or justifying the wrong that was done. It is not about saying that what happened was okay or that it didn't hurt. Forgiveness is about letting go of the hold that the offense has on us and choosing to release the person who wronged us from the debt we feel they owe. It's about making the decision to heal, to no longer allow the hurt to define our lives, and to free ourselves from the burden of holding on to something that has already happened. Forgiveness is a choice, an act of will, not an emotion. It's the path to emotional and spiritual freedom, and it opens the door to healing, peace, and reconciliation. Ultimately, unforgiveness keeps us from experiencing the fullness of life that God intends for us. It prevents us from walking in peace, from building authentic relationships, and from growing closer to the heart of God. It is a silent killer because it doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't come with dramatic displays of anger or bitterness. Instead, it quietly consumes us from the inside, slowly poisoning our hearts, minds, and souls. But when we choose to forgive, we are liberated. We free ourselves from the chains of the past, open ourselves to healing, and begin to experience the joy that comes with letting go of the burden of unforgiveness. Neglecting God's will is a dangerous path that many people unintentionally find themselves on. It often begins subtly, with small choices that seem inconsequential at the time, but eventually accumulate and lead us away from the divine purpose that God has set out for our lives. We live in a world that constantly bombards us with distractions, false promises of fulfillment, and a culture that often places individual desires over higher, more meaningful purposes. In the face of such overwhelming influences, it can be easy to lose sight of God's will, to forget that our lives are part of a larger plan designed by a loving Creator who knows what is best for us. Yet, when we neglect God's will, we are not just ignoring a set of guidelines or commands. We are turning away from the path that leads to true peace, joy, and fulfillment. At its core, neglecting God's will means placing our own desires, ambitions, and understanding above God's guidance. It is essentially saying that we believe we know better than God, or that we can control our own lives without needing His direction. This form of self-reliance can easily develop when we become too focused on immediate results, seeking instant gratification, or looking for shortcuts to success. Over time, the more we make decisions without seeking God's will, the more we drift from the plan He has laid out for us. One of the most common ways we neglect God's will is by seeking our own comfort and security above all else. It's easy to look around at the world and decide that we want a life of ease, financial success, or social approval, thinking that these things will bring us happiness. We may pursue careers, relationships, or lifestyles that seem desirable in the eyes of the world. But if they are not aligned with God's will, they may ultimately leave us feeling empty or unfulfilled. In these moments, we forget that true peace and satisfaction come not from external accomplishments, but from fulfilling God's purpose for our lives, even if it doesn't always lead to the comfort we imagine. Neglecting God's will also means failing to listen to His voice. In a world filled with constant noise, social media, television, work pressures, and personal distractions, it's easy to ignore the quiet promptings of God. He speaks to us through Scripture, through prayer, through the counsel of others, and through the situations He places in our lives. However, if we are not intentional about seeking Him or taking the time to listen, we risk missing His guidance. It's not that God stops speaking. It's that we stop paying attention. We become so focused on the tasks of daily life that we forget to pause and listen for His direction. The longer we neglect this, the more difficult it becomes to discern His will, and the more likely we are to make decisions that lead us down paths that are not aligned with His purpose. Another way we neglect God's will is by refusing to trust His timing. We live in a culture that encourages impatience, where we are accustomed to getting what we want quickly. Whether it's a promotion, a new relationship, or a sense of achievement, we often demand instant results. But God's timing is often different from our own. He may call us to wait, to be patient, or to endure hardships because he knows that through these experiences we are shaped, refined, and made ready for what he has planned. When we neglect God's will, we can become frustrated or anxious, trying to force things to happen on our own. But this only leads to stress, disappointment, and sometimes even regret. God's timing, although sometimes slow by our standards, is always perfect. And when we trust in His timing, we begin to see that everything happens according to His divine plan. Neglecting God's will also involves not fully surrendering our lives to Him. It is one thing to acknowledge God's existence and believe that He has a purpose for us. It is another to surrender ourselves completely to His guidance. There are times when we hold on to parts of our lives that we want to control, whether it's our careers, our relationships, or our personal ambitions. We may give God the small parts of our lives, those areas that feel comfortable or manageable, but we keep the bigger decisions for ourselves. By holding back, we are effectively saying that we don't fully trust God with our future, or that we have a better plan. But true fulfillment comes when we release control and allow God to lead us in every area of our lives, no matter how difficult it may be to let go of our own desires. When we surrender to God's will, we open ourselves to a life that is filled with purpose, direction, and peace. One of the most dangerous aspects of neglecting God's will is the gradual erosion of our relationship with Him. The more we neglect to seek His will, the more our hearts become hardened and the easier it becomes to justify our choices. We begin to prioritize our own desires over His commandments, and this leads to spiritual distance. It's like any relationship. When we fail to communicate and spend time together, the connection weakens. Over time, we can become spiritually numb, unable to recognize the prompting of the Holy Spirit or the peace that comes with following God's will. The longer we walk down this path of neglect, the harder it becomes to find our way back to the center of His purpose. There are consequences to neglecting God's will. While He is always ready to forgive and to help us find our way back, choosing to ignore His guidance leads us away from the peace, fulfillment, and purpose He intends for us. We can experience confusion, a lack of peace, and a sense of disconnection from the very people and situations that matter most. Our relationships may suffer, our work may feel hollow, and our sense of identity may become fractured. But God's will is never a burden. It is a path of grace that leads us to true joy. When we align ourselves with His purpose, we experience a sense of fulfillment that transcends any temporary satisfaction the world offers. Ultimately, neglecting God's will is a choice we make, often without fully realizing its impact. It's a choice to go our own way rather than surrendering to the divine direction that brings life and peace. When we choose to follow God's will, we enter into a deeper relationship with Him and discover the joy and purpose that comes from walking in alignment with His plan for our lives. The illusion of control is one of the most powerful deceptions that many people fall victim to throughout their lives. It's the belief that we can dictate every aspect of our circumstances, that through our own willpower, organization, or planning, we can avoid pain, failure, or uncertainty. In many ways, this illusion provides comfort, allowing us to feel secure in the face of life's uncertainties. It makes us believe that if we can control enough variables, we will be able to navigate life successfully. However, the truth is that the more we cling to this illusion, the more we end up feeling stressed, disappointed, and disconnected from the reality that much of life is outside of our control. This illusion begins early. From a young age, we are taught that effort and discipline will shape our future. While this is true to some extent, hard work often yields positive results. There are many aspects of life that no amount of effort can control. We can put in the time to study for a test, train for a competition, or work diligently at our job, but despite our best efforts, outcomes may not always align with our expectations. When we succeed, we attribute it to our own abilities, reinforcing the illusion that we control everything. But when things go wrong, we are often left feeling confused, frustrated, and helpless, as if our efforts were in vain. The truth is that no matter how much we prepare or plan, there are external forces and variables beyond our control. As we grow older, this illusion only becomes more ingrained. We enter adulthood with an increasing sense of responsibility, believing that our future is entirely shaped by the choices we make. Our desire for stability and success drives us to take control over every area of our lives, from our careers to our relationships to our finances. We try to anticipate every challenge and prevent every possible obstacle. However, this mindset often leads to anxiety and exhaustion. The more we try to control, the more we find ourselves overwhelmed by the pressure of having to manage every detail of our lives. We make plans for the future, but unexpected circumstances can derail those plans in an instant. A sudden job loss, an unexpected illness, a financial crisis. These events remind us just how fragile our sense of control truly is. The illusion of control also distorts the way we interact with others. We may try to shape the behaviors, attitudes, or actions of the people around us to fit our desires, whether it's in the form of managing a team, parenting our children, or even seeking to change a spouse. In doing so, we forget that people are not objects to be controlled, but individuals with their own minds, emotions, and choices. We cannot force others to act or feel in the way we want them to, yet we continue to try. This often leads to frustration and disappointment when people do not meet our expectations. In the process, we lose sight of the beauty of relationships, which thrive on mutual respect, understanding, and freedom, not control. Our desire to control others' actions can create distance, resentment, and conflict, as those around us may begin to feel suffocated or misunderstood. Additionally, the illusion of control can affect our relationship with God. We may think that through our prayers, good deeds, or adherence to religious practices, we can control God's will, or at least influence His actions in our favor. While God desires us to communicate with Him and seek His guidance, the idea that we can manipulate His will by our own actions or efforts is a fundamental misunderstanding of His sovereignty. When we operate under the illusion of control in our relationship with God, we fail to recognize that His plans are much greater than our own understanding. We may struggle with faith when our prayers are not answered in the way we expect or hope for, feeling as though we are losing control over the circumstances of our lives. However, God's will is always at work, even in times of uncertainty, and His timing is perfect. Trying to control our relationship with God or demand specific outcomes can prevent us from experiencing the peace that comes from trusting in His plan, which may be different from our own. In the broader context of life, the illusion of control can also lead to an unhealthy attachment to material things. We may believe that by accumulating wealth, possessions, or status, we can control our happiness and security. We work tirelessly to build a life of comfort, believing that with enough control over our resources, we can avoid hardship. But this is yet another illusion. Material possessions do not provide lasting fulfillment, and no amount of wealth can protect us from the unpredictability of life. The stock market crashes, the economy falters, or unexpected expenses arise, reminding us that wealth and material goods are fragile and cannot guarantee control over our future. Moreover, the pursuit of materialism often leads to a constant striving for more, an endless cycle of never feeling satisfied. Ultimately, the illusion of control is rooted in fear, fear of the unknown, fear of loss, fear of failure. It is natural to want to feel secure and to try to protect ourselves from pain and disappointment. But the more we attempt to control the uncontrollable, the more we set ourselves up for frustration. Life is inherently unpredictable. There will always be events and circumstances beyond our understanding or influence. Learning to accept that we cannot control everything is an essential step toward peace. Rather than trying to control the uncontrollable, we can shift our focus to trusting in something greater than ourselves. We can find peace in accepting the unpredictability of life, trusting that we are not alone, and that we have the strength to navigate whatever challenges come our way. In the end, letting go of the illusion of control doesn't mean abandoning responsibility or effort. It means recognizing the limits of our influence and trusting that we are part of a greater story, one that is woven by a purpose far beyond what we can see. It means surrendering the need to control every outcome and embracing the freedom that comes from knowing that we don't have to have all the answers. Life may be uncertain, but when we release our need for control, we open ourselves to the peace that comes from trusting in something greater than ourselves. Lack of consistency is one of the most significant obstacles to personal growth, success, and fulfillment. It is often the silent force that derails our best intentions and prevents us from achieving our goals, no matter how big or small they may be. Consistency is the thread that ties our efforts together, the steady beat that propels us forward. But when it is absent, we find ourselves drifting aimlessly, unable to make progress in any meaningful way. It can manifest in a variety of forms, from inconsistent work habits to irregular spiritual practices or even unpredictable behavior in relationships. The absence of consistency creates a cycle of frustration and self-doubt, leaving us feeling as though we are constantly starting over but never truly finishing anything. When we lack consistency, we often fall prey to a pattern of inconsistency that holds us back from accomplishing what we truly desire. We start with enthusiasm, energized by the prospect of change or improvement, but over time, our commitment begins to wane. Perhaps we begin a new fitness regimen with vigor, only to miss a few workouts, then more, until the entire plan falls apart. Similarly, we may embark on a new career path with great excitement, only to falter when the initial novelty fades and we're faced with the inevitable challenges. The problem isn't necessarily the lack of ability or resources, but the inconsistency that disrupts our progress. We can find ourselves caught in a cycle of starting projects, making resolutions and setting goals, only to see them abandoned when the novelty wears off or when the initial motivation fades. This inconsistency undermines our self-confidence, making us doubt our ability to see things through. One of the most harmful effects of a lack of consistency is that it creates a barrier to building momentum. Momentum is a powerful force that compounds over time. Small, consistent actions build upon one another, creating a sense of progress that encourages us to keep moving forward. However, when our efforts are inconsistent, we are unable to build that momentum, and we remain stuck in a state of inertia. We might find ourselves starting over repeatedly, never gaining the momentum that leads to lasting change or success. This cycle of effort and retreat is draining, leading to burnout and feelings of inadequacy. Without consistency, the small steps that are needed to create lasting change are often skipped or abandoned altogether. The lack of consistency is also detrimental to our relationships. Healthy relationships require reliability and trust, and without consistency, we may struggle to build a solid foundation with others. If we are inconsistent in our actions, emotions, or communication, those around us may begin to feel uncertain or unappreciated. In romantic relationships, for example, inconsistency in affection, support, or commitment can create feelings of confusion or insecurity. Similarly, in friendships or family dynamics, A lack of consistency can erode trust and lead to misunderstandings. Consistency is essential in showing others that we care and that they can depend on us. But when we fail to consistently show up for the people in our lives, we risk damaging those relationships beyond repair. In our spiritual lives, the lack of consistency can have similarly profound effects. Spiritual practices such as prayer, meditation, or reading scripture are not meant to be performed sporadically, but should be integrated into the rhythm of our daily life. Consistency in these practices deepens our connection with God and strengthens our faith. Without regularity, however, it's easy to lose sight of our spiritual goals. If we only pray or reflect on our faith when things are going well, or when we feel particularly inspired, we miss the opportunity to develop a steady, disciplined relationship with God. Just as any relationship requires ongoing effort and attention, our spiritual lives thrive when we consistently make time for God. When we neglect this consistency, we risk feeling spiritually distant, disconnected, and unfulfilled. Another area where a lack of consistency can be particularly damaging is in our professional lives. Success in any career, no matter the field, requires consistent effort and dedication. Inconsistent performance, such as fluctuating work habits or a lack of attention to detail, can hinder progress and lead to missed opportunities. Employers and colleagues rely on consistency in order to build trust and respect. If we are unable to consistently meet deadlines, produce quality work, or maintain professional standards, it will not be long before others begin to question our reliability and commitment. The lack of consistency can limit career growth, as it prevents us from developing a reputation for dependability, which is one of the cornerstones of professional success. The road to personal growth is similarly hindered by inconsistency, whether it's the desire to develop healthier habits, acquire new skills, or cultivate emotional resilience. Growth requires persistent effort. It's easy to become motivated when we first start a new self-improvement journey, but without the consistency to follow through, the changes we seek to make often slip away. Personal development is not a one-time event. It's a process that takes time, patience, and sustained effort. Each small step we take toward our goals builds the foundation for lasting change, but if we fail to show up consistently, we miss the opportunity to build on those small steps. Without consistency, our growth is stunted, and we may find ourselves stuck in the same place, unable to break free from old patterns. Inconsistent habits are often rooted in a lack of discipline or a fear of failure. We may start with good intentions but become discouraged when we don't see immediate results. This frustration can lead to abandoning our efforts altogether, reinforcing the belief that success is not possible. Overcoming this pattern requires a shift in mindset. Instead of focusing solely on the end result, we need to learn to value the process and appreciate the small victories along the way. Consistency is built on the understanding that progress is gradual and requires sustained effort. When we accept that setbacks are part of the journey, we are more likely to remain consistent, even in the face of challenges. Ultimately, the lack of consistency is one of the most significant barriers to achieving our dreams, improving our relationships, and living a life of purpose. While motivation may start strong, it is consistency that will carry us through to the finish line. Without consistency, we remain stuck in cycles of false starts, unable to build the momentum needed for lasting change. Whether in our personal, professional, or spiritual lives, consistency is the key to success, and it is the small, daily choices that ultimately determine the path we take. In the end, consistency is the bridge between where we are and where we want to be. It's the small, consistent actions we take every day that compound into meaningful progress, not the bursts of effort that come and go. To break free from the patterns that hold us back, We must commit to showing up, even when it's hard, even when the results aren't immediate. Whether it's in our work, relationships, spiritual practices, or personal growth. Consistency is the quiet but powerful force that transforms our intentions into reality. Let us remember that true success, fulfillment, and growth come not from grand gestures, but from the steady, faithful steps we take each day. So, let us choose consistency and let it lead us to the life we were always meant to live.